President's immigration crackdown now has a new group of immigrants on edge. In recent days, some who were once protected under a humanitarian parole program initiated during President Biden's tenure are now facing potential deportation. For clarity on how the uncertain future is shaping up now for Cuban exiles and other groups seeking refugees status in the United States, we are joined by Jorge Duane, former director of the Cuban Research Institute at Florida International University. Jorge, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So, Jorge, this was a pretty stunning turn here. Cubans in Miami particularly, there is an outsized population there that supports the Republican Party. Why do you suppose that there is this reversal in terms of trying to send some Cuban Americans, Cubans back to Cuba?
Yeah, as you say, Cuban Americans have supported the Republican Party for many decades. And in fact, in the last poll sponsored by my university, by Florida International University, 68% of Cuban Americans intended to vote for President Trump. However, many of them have been disappointed because there are more than 110,000 Cubans now who arrived in the U.S. under the humanitarian parole program authorized by the Biden administration, and that program has been canceled.
So with this change, and we're talking about a decades-long, they've enjoyed this privilege, Cubans that have come to the United States, as long as they've touched dry land, many of them coming over on boats, making that 90-mile journey from Cuba to the Florida Keys and other parts of Florida. As long as they hit dry land, they are granted granted protection here in the United States. They supported the Republican Party for many decades. So how are they feeling now? What is the sense that you're getting from the folks who may be affected by this?
I think it's a very ambivalent position of the Cuban American community now, because on the one hand, as I just said, the vast majority supported President Trump. On the other hand, they also supported the humanitarian parole program, and their rights and benefits in this country since the Cold War are now being threatened, because even though there's a law, the Cuban Adjustment Law, that was approved in 1966, which allows Cubans to stay in the country after 1 year and 1 day of residence here, now that benefit also is being threatened. So there are many thousands, in addition to the 100,000 who are now whose parole status has been canceled, who don't really know what to expect, whether they can become residents or, in fact, be forced to live as undocumented workers in this country.
I'm curious, do you see any switching of the party here since this is happening? Because some of this is happening through some of the Congress people, many who are Cuban Americans, who are pushing for the deportation of at least some Cubans who have ties to the communist government in Cuba.
That's happening as well, and it's very popular cause in the Cuban American community. Many people who have entered the country have resumed contacts with the Communist Party in Cuba, or they were actually part of the repression against Cuban exiles. So most Cuban Americans are very happy that that is happening. But at the same time, there are many others who have committed no crimes, who don't really have any penal antecedents in Cuba or in the U.S., who now are likely going to be deported. However, Cuba also does not necessarily welcome them on the island, and they might be forced to live on the ground there.
That is going to be an interesting turn of events. I do want to get to Venezuelans, because there is a big Venezuelan population that just exploded over the last 20 years in Miami as well. And now their protection status is being removed as well. What can you tell us about the reaction from the Venezuelan community in South Florida about this?
Yeah, again, I live in a place called Doral, which is one of the highest concentrations of Venezuelans in Miami. And again, you can see the fear and the concern among many Venezuelan Americans who, if the current status is revoked, will have to go back to Venezuela, which again is a very difficult country to live in, especially if you disagree with the Maduro government. So like the Cubans, I think many Venezuelans are reassessing what their voting preferences will be for the midterm elections, although perhaps it's too early to know whether there'll be a change from the Republican to the Democratic Party.